that they will attract a higher price as a stolen second-hand device than they would in the UK market. So that's where we're seeing these quite sophisticated organised crime networks begin to realise that mobile phone theft is more lucrative than perhaps drugs markets or weapons markets. And that's why they're turning their eye to this particular modus operandi.
Is there a feeling that the tech firms themselves should be doing more here as well? Should they be doing more to make these phones unusable if they are stolen?
This is one that has been kicked around in terms of, do we need to legislate? Should the industry do more to protect these devices? There is a question, I think, for those providers of mobile phones to think about how can they educate their customers to protect themselves. Because sometimes when a phone is stolen, it's not just the device that is then turned into hard cash for the criminals. There's also then ongoing frauds, accessing personal data to then be able to commit further offences. That's where I think the mobile phone network providers and the manufacturers do play a role to be able to have that kill switch to prevent those further ongoing offences to be committed when somebody unfortunately falls victim to this crime.
Now, of course, it's not just phone theft that we're talking about here, because we've seen retailers take, some actions, maybe locking more stuff behind a counter or, putting more stuff in safety boxes. There's also a conflict, isn't there, from a retailer's point of view, because on one hand, they want everything out on display. They want it to be, a big choice for customers to come in and hopefully buy more. But at the same time, you've got the security department saying, no, we want to lock more behind counters and, behind doors to make sure that it's not pinched. I wonder who wins in all of this.
There sometimes can be internal conversations between departments such as marketing that wants everything to be so accessible and look so fantastic and you can touch and feel all of the products. And then the security function that, as you say, might rather things were locked away behind cabinets. Now, fast forward a couple of years since the beginning of this increase in acquisitive crime, and I think we're now seeing a more sophisticated response to how you can manage criminal behaviours using types of psychology combined with technology to make it harder for them to actually access products. What we're also seeing is the increasing use of artificial intelligence, as we are across most sectors, and the ability to use AI and overlay it over things like CCTV and facial recognition is providing this really clear way of detecting offenders. So using behavioural analytics, people who are suspicious tend to act slightly differently to people with honest intentions. And of course, then being able to detect an individual after the event, even if they've left the retail store, and understand if they're offending in multiple stores across multiple locations. So I think joining the dots is starting to become much cleverer, and retailers are much more sophisticated now in how they identify offenders.
Emmeline Taylor, really good to have you on the programme this week. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, still to come, will Saudi Arabia's new low-cost airline help the kingdom's Vision 2030 take off? I'll ask its boss about setting up a new carrier in the country. I'll see you after the break. Welcome back to Talking Business. Now, Saudi Arabia is on an ambitious path of diversification, away from oil and energy into tourism and other new industries. It's about creating new jobs, new investment under the plan called Vision 2030. And one key element is new infrastructure in everything from energy to transport and housing. And airlines are playing a crucial role, not just connecting Saudi Arabia with the world, but allowing its growing population to get around domestically. I sat down with the boss of the new Saudi low-cost carrier. It's called Flyadeal, and asked him about the challenges of building a new airline. Stephen Greenaway, welcome to Talking Business. Now, explain Flyadeal, the concept of a low-cost carrier in Saudi Arabia, a pretty new concept for the kingdom.
Yeah, a new concept for the kingdom, and also a new concept, relative new concept for the region. What we are is an airline within an airline. So we're part of the Saudia Group. I think most people know Saudia. It's a full-service carrier, the national airline of Saudia. We were started 8 years ago as their LCC airline. And the reason, or the main reason why we were created is high volume, low fare operations. That is attracting new market segments to the group that Saudia couldn't handle or couldn't offer profitably themselves. So we're very much that low-cost segment, the mass market segment that we provide.
And that really fits in with that picture of Saudi Arabia opening up as a destination. So this is about growing that pie. You've got more people coming to the kingdom, so therefore more routes to cater for.
Absolutely. So we always talk about the tourism, inbound tourism, countries opened up, but domestically you've got a huge domestic market, 35 million Saudis in our domestic market. They need a cheap way to get around the kingdom and also go overseas. The inbound market, tourism market, which I spoke of, the labour traffic, which comes in from India, Southeast Asia, etc., that comes in to build the streets, build buildings or whatever. And then on top of that, also the religious, which is, again, mass market, low yield, and that's something we're targeting as well.
And domestic transportation within Saudi Arabia is pretty undeveloped anyway. It's not like I could take a train or a bus across the kingdom.
Yeah, you do have a few high-speed trains, funny enough, Jeddah to Mecca as an example, or Medina, but they're short distances. You don't have anything that's equivalent for longer distances like Riyadh and Jeddah and Dammam and so forth. So air travel, just like in my home country of Australia, absolutely essential to get people from A to B within the kingdom.
A lot of people will have heard of Vision 2030, and that, of course, Saudi Arabia's plan, and it aligns a lot of different things, doesn't it? It's about economic development, but it's also about, you know, recruitment, about training, it's about education. Where do you fit into that?
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. Vision 2030 is not just about the big projects that you hear about, the NEOMs, it's also about equity, women participation in the workforce, life expectancy, home ownership, health, all of these type of things. Where we come and play is, I probably think we're probably like a, how should I say, we're a stimulant to the economy. We're an artery to the economy. We're allowing people to move around, bring people in. We're going to have the tourism sector in Saudi Arabia in the next couple of years contributing 10% of GDP. Now, part of the 2030 plan is to have a more diversified economy, just like Dubai has done over the past couple of decades. Move away from petrochemical reliance and a more diversified economy. So we play that role, and we are the arteries of the country, moving people around as effectively and efficiently as possible.
Geopolitically, you're in quite a volatile part of the world. What does that mean for how you plan and execute your operations? Because, you know, you're trying to put on new routes, you're trying to grow markets, and actually we know that could change overnight given what's happening in the region. How do you prepare for that?
Flexibility. You know, we have a huge home market which is stable. I think the Middle East gets a bad rap. Everyone thinks, oh, the Middle East is completely unstable. All of it is unstable. It's simply not the case. The Middle East is a huge geography. We're living in one of the largest countries in the Middle East, the largest population. There's a lot of stability in a lot of places in the Middle East, just as you would have in Europe or whatever the case may be. There are some flashpoints, don't get me wrong, but we have to plan flexibly. You know, when I talk about Syria, we can't wait to start serving Syria, but there may be a situation where we find Syria closes down again, God forbid. But, you know, we have to have backup, we have contingency, we have flexibility, but at the moment, I think the trend is actually quite good, and maybe you don't get that message through maybe some of the reporting that goes on or what have you. We're actually seeing the region open up, becoming even more dynamic, not being problematic. There are issues, but there are issues everywhere, but you just have to maintain that flexibility.
And there are logistical challenges as well, because, you know, it's one thing serving a domestic market where you maybe have a bit more control about where you take off and land and the facilities that you're dealing with there. But if you look across the region, there needs to be a lot of developments of airport infrastructure in some countries. And I'm thinking particularly places like Syria, for example.
Yeah, sure. Look, at the end of the day, the one thing I've learned living down there is the Arabs are very industrious. And so Syria's just opened up literally a matter of months. And we have full ground operation capabilities, all of this type of stuff. There are some limitations, like we can't lift fuel from Syria at the moment because fuel is contaminated, but they're fixing that. The biggest issue we have is not necessarily the logistics per se. Yes, it's a bit more of a challenge than, say, in Western Europe or what have you, but we're used to that. It's more insurance. Right. And insurance providers, obviously there's more, how should I say, conservatism on that angle. Okay. And so as an example, when we fly into places like Syria or Iraq, we have to fly in during the day. We have to tank a fuel in to be able to fly back out again. There's other such SOPs that we need to adopt that we don't adopt when we're going to Dubai, as an example. But again, that's when it comes back to the flexibility. We want to get into the market desperately. We know there's a huge demand there, and we're going to adapt ourselves to be able to do that market.
Stephen Greenway, thank you for being on Talking Business.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Great to have you.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.
That's it for now. For more updates throughout the week, you can follow me online, and there's more on the world of business on the BBC News website and app. But until next time, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
The BBC was always on in the Mashiri house, and my dream actually was to be a BBC News presenter. I want to be for others what the BBC was for us, a trusted source of stability and hope. For me, trust is about presence, about fostering relationships all around the world over years. So when a story breaks, we're not chasing a lead, we're already there. I'm Marianne Mashiri on The World Today for BBC News.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Super Typhoon Feng Huang makes landfall in the Philippines. At least 2 people have already died, with more than 1 million forced to evacuate.
This is not the first typhoon this season, but it may be, in terms of its size, the biggest, and it's carrying huge quantities of rain.
King Charles leads the nation in a 2-minute silence to remember those who've died in conflict as part of Remembrance Sunday commemorations. The UK will deploy troops to Belgium after suspected Russian drone activity was reported near the country's airports. US senators are back in session today, trying to find a solution to the record-breaking government shutdown, now in its 40th day. Hello, welcome. I'm Martine Croxall. A super typhoon has made landfall in the Philippines. Known as Feng Huang, the typhoon crossed the coastline in the country's north at 9:10 in the evening local time. This is a suspension bridge in the town of Camalagan. It shows the strength of the winds recorded in excess of 240 kilometres per hour. Waves battered the coasts. Tens of thousands of people have been forced to evacuate, and the defence chief warned millions more to get to higher ground before it's too late. This is a weather map of the typhoon, giving you an idea of its scale. 2 people have already died in flash flooding, with fears that that number will rise. This is the second massive storm to hit the country in the space of a week. The previous typhoon killed at least 200 people and left a trail of destruction. So what is a super typhoon, and how do they differ from the usual typhoons? Well, super typhoons are extremely powerful tropical cyclones in the Western Pacific. They have sustained winds of at least 150 miles an hour, which is about 240 kilometres an hour. They form over warm ocean waters near the equator and can cause catastrophic wind, rain and storm surge damage. The strongest storms on Earth, they often have a span of more than 500 kilometres, and super typhoons can double their wind speed in under a day. Benetton J. Estrella is a weather specialist at PAGASA, the Philippine Atmospheric, Geophysical and Astronomical Services Administration. He told us more about the weather conditions in the city of Quezon.
We are here in Luzon Island in the Philippines, and we have wind signals, meaning we are experiencing stormy weather here in Quezon City. It is around more or less 100 kilometers per hour, but right at the very center or near the center of Typhoon Feng Huang, Super Typhoon Feng Huang, it is around 185 kilometers per hour. So there are some gusty conditions, and the weather there is not really good. There are some occasional intense to torrential rains as well.
How seriously did people take the warnings that they needed to get to safety?
Actually, early last week, we've had this strong typhoon entering the central portion of the Philippines. It was called Typhoon Kalmegi, and it became a lesson because, as you have said earlier, there are over 200 casualties, and this time we are trying to minimize as much as possible. We're targeting 0 casualties. Unfortunately, there have been 2. So the track of this time, the Super Typhoon Feng Huang, is a bit more north than the previous one, and we have learned from the previous experiences from the previous typhoon, and we're making sure that we have preemptively evacuated many of the people here in Luzon Island.
But how do people cope when they're facing one storm of an enormous size after another? Because we've seen from the satellite pictures just how big this thing is.
Yes, it's very unfortunate, and during this time of the year, we are experiencing these kinds of tropical cyclones, strong typhoons, even super typhoons, making landfall over majority of the country. And the very key here is preparation and awareness of what do these warnings that Pagasa give us, that give the public. For example, heavy rainfall warnings. What can these heavy rainfall warnings impact their lives, their properties? How do they prepare? Should they evacuate? Should they monitor or be alert or communicate with their local government units? Those types of things.
How effective in the past have the authorities been at helping people get back to normal?
Unfortunately, it's a very difficult situation right now in the Philippines because we are, again, considered as one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world, probably the most disaster-prone this year because of the recent earthquakes, the recent volcanic eruptions, the different tropical cyclones have entered our country. So the type of preparation and resilience coming from these disasters is very challenging. We have to reach out to our government, but as well as depending on ourselves as well.
Weather specialist Benison J. Estrella speaking to us earlier. King Charles has led national commemorations for those who died for their country in 2 world wars and other conflicts. A 2-minute silence was observed at the Cenotaph in London. Services also took place in other parts of the country, such as Edinburgh, Cardiff and Belfast. Graham Satchell reports.
In glorious autumnal sunlight, the Cenotaph in Whitehall, the annual focus of a moment of national remembrance. In Roman numerals on the side, 1945, it is the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. And centre stage this year, 20 World War II veterans. The youngest is now 98.
The real heroes are out there lying under crosses. That's how I feel about it. We are lucky to be here.
I'm so proud of the men, the ladies, the uniform, everything. It's not difficult to feel a bit emotional.
At 2 minutes to 11, the King led out the royal party. With him, Prince William, the Prince of Wales, and Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, is at a remembrance service in Australia. The King's brother Andrew is no longer a serving member of the royal family. A salute in readiness for the national 2-minute silence when those who lost their lives in the world wars and other conflicts are remembered. After the sounding of the last post, the King laid his wreath on behalf of the nation against the Cenotaph's northern face. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, and other political leaders laid their wreaths, followed by High Commissioners and military chiefs. And then it was the turn of the veterans, some 10,000 men and women, to march past the Cenotaph. Pride of place, the World War II veterans. Among them, former airman Jack Ruck, who turns 100 today. They march to remember lost friends who made the ultimate sacrifice. Graham Satchell, BBC News.
The UK is sending military personnel and equipment to Belgium to help bolster its defences after a series of drone incursions on its airspace. Belgium's main airport was forced to close temporarily on Thursday night after drones were spotted nearby, as well as sightings in other locations, including a military base. It's widely suspected that Russia is behind these disruptive incidents. Let's speak to Hamish de Breton-Gordon, who is a defence expert and former British Army colonel. Thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News. What's leading the authorities to believe that these are Russian drones?
Well, I think first of all, it's absolutely the modus operandi of other drone incursions and attacks that we've seen that have been apportioned to the Russians. Similar activities in Denmark, Lithuania, and of course Poland. And we know that we are in what's called a hybrid war with Russia. Dame Manningham-Buller, previous head of MI5, and also our security service MI6 recently have told us we are in this sort of hybrid war. And this type of activity is exactly the sort of the activity that the Russians conduct there. Because, you know, if you disrupt people's ability to travel, it really hacks them off. And I think what the Russians are trying to do is to disrupt and destabilize Western Europe. So we are less likely to oppose the Russians and build up our military forces, which of course the Russians don't want.
If we cast our minds back to December 2018, London Gatwick Airport was closed for more than a day, disrupting 140,000 passengers because of drone sightings. So how well placed is the UK to help Belgium?
Well, I think we're very well placed. A lot of research has been going into this. We're learning an awful lot from our colleagues in Ukraine who, you know, drones are now the sort of ubiquitous currency of modern warfare. And what we're learning off them, but also we know that our own defence science establishment of Porton Down are really leading the way in a lot of what we call soft and hard kill against drones. So I think the Chief of the Defence Staff was very careful in his explanation this morning, because we don't want to obviously give away exactly what's been doing, but certainly the technical expertise that Britain has developed, particularly in the electromagnetic spectrum area, where you can take drones down by using that, or even hard kill, is something where we're leading the way. And of course, what we want to do is to support our allies like the Belgians to make sure that they can stop this as soon as possible. But it is something we need to be aware of and something we need to build on. But I think, thankfully, in this country, you know, we're at the top of this game, and let's hope that will remain so.
Which other culprits beyond Russia might NATO allies need to be wary of?
Well, Russia is the main threat at the moment. I don't think anybody would argue with that. But unfortunately, there are still jihadist terrorists, Islamic State around. When I was fighting with the Peshmerga 3 or 4 years ago in northern Iraq, ISIS used drones to attack us. So the terror threat, I'm afraid, has not gone away, and no doubt the security services are all over that. And the proxies that support Russia as well, North Korea and Iran, and those people that Russia is recruiting to act as their agents in Europe and potentially the UK. So this is an issue, but with any threat, it can be stabilised and it can be mitigated if you put in the right effort and resources to do it. And I think in the UK, we are at the moment are doing exactly that.
Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
The Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy has said that the BBC is facing serious allegations about a Panorama programme which is reported to have misled viewers by editing a speech by the US President Donald Trump. She said she was confident the BBC chairman, Samir Shah, was treating the issue with the seriousness it demands. It's expected Mr Shah will offer an apology when he reports to MPs, as Noor Nanji reports.
The Panorama, Trump, A Second Chance, was broadcast in October last year, just before the American election. One sequence featured this.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Donald Trump speaking on the day of the assault on the Capitol building in January 2021. What sounds like one sentence is from different parts of the speech, 54 minutes apart. A former BBC external advisor, Michael Prescott, is said to have voiced concerns about the way the speech was edited in an internal editorial report seen by the Telegraph newspaper. Now the Culture Secretary has indicated the BBC has serious questions to answer.
It isn't just about the Panorama programme, although that is incredibly serious. There are a series of very serious allegations made, the most serious of which is that there is systemic bias in the way that difficult issues are reported at the BBC. I've spoken to the chairman this week. I am confident that he is treating this with the seriousness that demands.
The BBC has said it doesn't comment on leaked documents, but says it's taking feedback seriously and carefully. Its chairman, Samir Shah, will report back to a parliamentary select committee tomorrow. The BBC is expected to apologise, while Michael Prescott is due to appear before the committee.
I have never believed the great conspiracy theory that the BBC is some sort of terrible organisation determined to lie to the world. I think it has faults and imperfections.
The row over Panorama comes as the BBC faces criticism on a number of other fronts as well, including over its Middle East reporting and over its coverage of trans issues. Not for the first time, the BBC is under scrutiny. The question is, will an apology be enough to take the pressure off? Noor Nanji, BBC News.
Israeli forensic experts have confirmed that the remains of a body they received from the Red Cross is IDF soldier Hadar Goldin. He was killed during the 2014 Gaza war. Hamas said yesterday that it had retrieved the body from a tunnel in Rafah in an IDF-held part of the Strip. People in Iran's second biggest city, Mashhad, have been told to ration water as the country faces its worst drought in decades. According to officials, levels at reservoirs supplying the northeastern city have fallen below 3%. Similarly, in the capital Tehran, city authorities announced on Saturday that water would be cut during certain times of the day. Here's our BBC Persian reporter, Behrang Tajdin, with the latest.
In several major cities, including 5 of the 7 most populous cities in Iran, reservoirs are either dry or very close to that point. You know, autumn is the start of the rainy season in Iran. But this year, there hasn't been any rain. In 15 out of 31 provinces, especially those who already were facing water crisis, there hasn't been any rain at all. And the head of country's National Climate Center has warned that in the next 10 days also there is no rain forecast. So basically these cities, including Tehran, Mashhad, Karaj, Isfahan, Tabriz, these are all running out of water. There is no water left. And because of that, the authorities are basically begging people to cut use and also are planning to cut water at certain periods, partly to stop the leaking, because the infrastructure is very old, very leaky, and if they basically turn off the taps for the city, at least even if people change the time of their use, there would be less water leaking out of the pipes.
Behrang Tajdin from BBC Persian. US senators are expected to reconvene today after a rare Saturday session to try to find a solution to the record-breaking government shutdown. Republicans have rejected an offer by Democrats to pass the current funding bill in exchange for a 1-year extension to healthcare subsidies. The 40-day shutdown has sidelined many federal workers and affected food welfare payments, as well as causing the cancellation of thousands of flights due to a shortage of air traffic controllers. But the Republicans and Democrats are still far apart.
I know many Republicans stormed out the gate to dismiss this offer, but that's a terrible mistake. Our offer is not a new policy. This is not negotiating in a shutdown. It's simply agreeing to maintain current funding levels. A 1-year extension is something many Republicans themselves have said they want. It's something a great many Americans support. 55% of Trump supporters support it, after all. So it's alarming that Republicans even refuse to acknowledge we have an immediate crisis right now that needs fixing.
The Democrat leader's proposal is a non-starter for the Republican majority. The Democrat leader wants to believe that this is a, quote, simple proposal, that it is some sort of compromise, but it is not.
Our North America correspondent Peter Bowes says that as every day goes by, the consequences of the government shutdown get more serious.
Congress is still deadlocked. The two parties, Republicans and Democrats, seemingly really poles apart in terms of how they see the future and the crucial issue of these health subsidies, whether they can or cannot be involved in the current spending plan. Republicans say it's got to be a clean bill. The Democrats want to talk about health. But as every day goes by, this gets much more serious. And we've been hearing today from the Transport Secretary talking about the capacity for air travel in this country. We know that about 1,000 flights were cancelled yesterday. We're just over 2 weeks away from the Thanksgiving holiday, the busiest travel time of the year in this country. And more air traffic controllers are calling in sick. They're suffering from stress. Others are taking other jobs just to try to pay their own bills. And Transport Secretary is saying that yesterday, 18 out of 21 air traffic controllers in the city of Atlanta just didn't show up for work.
And we've even heard that there's been special permission to temporarily halt what used to be known as food stamps to help low-income families.
Yes, that's another part of this debate, and in terms of just dealing with the situation, and it's really locked up in the courts at the moment. But the latest is that this huge programme that about 42 million Americans rely upon, as you say, food stamps, it literally pays for food on the plate every day for many families, that scheme is currently only 50% funded. So there is a dire shortage of money. As every day goes by, that situation seemingly gets worse, and clearly a huge worry for many people.
How likely is it that the people who've lost pay will actually get the back pay when they do go back to work, when everything does sort of wind back into gear?
Well, they're told that they will get back pay. That's always been the understanding, and we've had previous shutdowns as well where that has been the situation. Air traffic controllers told that they will get paid eventually, but many of them are nervous about that, and some of them have been saying in the last few days they've already missed one paycheck, and as the weeks go by, the possibility of them missing a second paycheck is looming. Many of them just saying they can't cope. They can't cope without any money at all coming in for their families.
Peter Bowes. Activists in Afghanistan say the Taliban authorities have ordered women to wear burqas if they want to be allowed into hospitals and government offices in the western city of Herat. Taliban guards are said to have been denying entry to women without the full body covering at medical centres and schools for several days. It's the latest restriction imposed on women since the Taliban seized power in Kabul in August 2021. The medical charity MSF in Afghanistan said such restrictions often meant delayed or denied care. It said in the past 2 days there had been a sharp drop in the number of admissions to paediatric services at the Herat Regional Hospital. At least one person has died, 9 people have been rescued and dozens of people are missing after a migrant boat capsized near the Thai-Malaysian border. It sank near the southern Thai island of Taratau. Maritime officials say they believe those on board were part of a group of 300 people who'd been travelling on a larger vessel before they split up onto smaller boats as they approached Malaysian waters. Search operations are underway for the other vessels. Local media have suggested the migrants on board were members of Myanmar's Rohingya minority fleeing persecution. Many people know about the famous truce of Christmas 1914 when British and German soldiers stopped fighting. But a Newcastle University professor says a similar, just as remarkable event also took place in the Second World War. Nick McGoran travelled to Japan in June as part of a team researching a ceasefire between US and Japanese soldiers on Aka Island in 1945, during which the two sides talked, picnicked and even prayed together. Joe Lonsdale reports.
The Battle of Okinawa in 1945 was one of the most brutal of World War II. Amid this bloodshed, Lieutenant Colonel George Clark was tasked with taking Aka Island for the Americans. But instead of fighting, he used loudspeakers to appeal for a surrender and persuaded Japanese POWs to help negotiate a truce.